It's time for another episode of True Ghost Stories. This is the Outside the Veil show, and I'm your host, Dave Mace. Before we get started, let me thank you and the rest of the listeners who tune in. This is the 10th episode, and frankly, I'm a little amazed that I've had as many listeners as I've had. The last show put us at over 1,000 listens, which is far better than I had ever imagined when I started this little experiment. So I just want to say again, thank you. Thank you very much. As long as you're listening, I'll keep doing these shows. Now, let's get to why we're here. Ghosts. A few weeks ago, I was in Monterey, California. I've been to the area numerous times and prefer to stay away from the main tourist traps and focus on Monterey's amazing history and buildings and architectures, which are quite old for California standards. While I was there, I stopped in and explored some of the old adobes and other historic buildings downtown. Many of these locations are considered haunted by some, and I can see why. The old jail next to the city, the Customs House on Fisherman's Wharf, the Monterey Hotel, and the Louis Stevenson House are all filled with Old West charm and history that invokes visions of the past. In the evenings, I would return to the condo and jump on my laptop and research the places that I'd been visiting. I'd make notes as to any ghost sightings connected to various locations. One night, I came across an old newspaper article from June 30th, 1901. It was published in the Sunday edition of the Los Angeles Herald. It was titled, "A Mexican Ghost Story. Spooks are plentiful in and around Monterey." The article was more of an interest piece as opposed to a report on a specific incident. However, like other stories I've done in the past, it included some specific locations and details that made it quite interesting. So, without further ado, let's go to Monterey. Two laborers drove their cart along a peaceful Monterey road. It was a warm July evening, and their only thoughts after a hard day's work were getting home, having a little supper, and hitting the sack. The men had made this trek many times over the past year and were feeling relaxed and safe traveling this particular route. They were somewhere in between the La Virginia and the La Carlota haciendas when they had their horrifying experience. At first, they only sensed that something was different as they entered this particular stretch of road. There was a change in temperature, then a dark movement up ahead. Initially, it looked like a shadow moving through the leaves, but quickly became apparent that the shadow had human form and seemed to materialize into a young man standing in their path. As they grew nearer the figure, they knew immediately that the thing in front of them was a spirit or ghost, and not of the living. One of the men crossed himself and began reciting the Lord's Prayer, while the other froze with fear and was sure he was about to meet his final end. The ghost reached out and grabbed the horse's bridle, causing the horse to rear up in terror. It whinnied and snorted and refused to go past the apparition. The men yelled, and the driver began lashing at the horse to encourage him to go. As quickly as the incident had begun, it was over. The boy had simply vanished, and the men wasted no time driving into town. Neither man looked back or spoke. Once there, they told everyone they encountered about their experience. Word spread quickly about the ghost boy. The story would have been quickly forgotten had it not been for another sighting a few weeks later. Two different laborers, who were employed by the La Virginia hacienda, were walking by a large hole where a huge oak had once stood. It was there that the luminescent ghost boy, wearing what appeared to be a death shroud, suddenly appeared. They estimated that the boy was in his early teens, but they had no doubt that the boy was long dead, and they immediately became filled with terror. They broke into a run, trying to get as far away as possible, as quickly as possible. One of the men tripped and fell, and the ghost was upon him in a flash and stood on his back. He could feel the pressure of the ghost's feet, which began to burn him like fire. The terrible apparition faded away, and the man was able to get up and continue his escape. This story also made it to town and spread quickly amongst the locals. One of the men verified his story by showing the amazed town folks the red burn marks on his back where the ghost had stood. Some of the Indians in town reported that they had also seen the ghost, and they believed it was connected to an old tale of unknown origins. It was said that years earlier a man who was extremely wealthy had buried his gold and valuables in the spot where the hole was. These were wild and lawless times, and you had to do whatever was necessary to protect your property. Unfortunately, desperate people can also be motivated to do evil things, and a group of men kidnapped the man's 14-year-old son. They sent a ransom note demanding a large sum of money. The note stated they would kill the boy if he did not pay the ransom. The man loved his son, but he refused to negotiate with such despicable men. There was no guarantee that the boy would be safe even if he paid. It wasn't that he cherished his money more than his son, and he hoped the men were not so cold-blooded as to kill an innocent young man. Unfortunately, they were indeed despicable men, and in retaliation for the father's refusal to pay, they killed the boy and deposited his body near the man's house. The man found his son's still warm body in a bloody heap, and the father was immediately overcome with rage and grief. A day later, he buried his son and then set about planning his vengeance. Wealth brings with it a certain amount of power, and the man used all of his resources to track down the criminals who were responsible. He put together a hand-picked team of trackers and gunmen, and they rode out of town, already with clues as to where to find their quarry. Old West justice was often harsh, especially when fueled by revenge. The kidnappers were eventually found and captured, but had they known what was in store for them, they would have surely fought to the death. After their capture, the posse restrained and tortured the murderers with red-hot branding irons. In the end, they welcomed death. Upon returning home, the man dug up his son's body and reburied it over the spot where the gold was concealed, deep in the earth, in the dark hole, where the old tree had once been. In the end, the gold meant nothing. Neither did his revenge on the men who took the young life of his son. He died a short time later, probably out of grief. The recent sightings and retelling of the story of the man's son resulted in new excitement about the hidden treasure. The less superstitious folks thought there may be something to the story of hidden treasure, and asked the hacienda owners for permission to dig and search for the gold. Perhaps a secret deal was made, or maybe the owners refused, but there's no further information available if any gold was found. It's hard to say how much of this tale is true, if any of it. But it's a great example of how legends meld with history and current events to make for an exciting potential for finding treasure. Who's not going to listen to this story and listen and wonder, could I find that gold? Would you challenge a ghost for the opportunity to find riches beyond your wildest dreams, even if the ghost could burn you? Tales of ghosts and treasures have stoked the imagination of people over the centuries. However, ghosts only make good watchmen if they're real. Otherwise, only believers will be deterred. So, if you were on a back road in the Monterey area on a late moonlit night and came across a deep depression filled with low-lying, misty fog, would you stop and look for evidence of buried gold? Or would you hurry on your way and not risk an encounter with a spirit guard? Occasionally, I come across a true non-believer who, even when placed in a creepy, haunted environment, won't flinch at challenging the resident spirits. But most skeptics are armchair skeptics, willing to deny the existence of ghosts as long as they're seated in the comfort of their well-lit living room. Put them in a darkened stairwell in a haunted abandoned insane asylum and they quickly turn into doubting puddles of quivering jelly. Belief in ghosts is deeply rooted in us, probably connected to our ancestral fear of the dark and unknown. Even in these enlightened times, we still can't shake it completely. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of True Ghost Stories and will join me again soon. Please drop by my website, outsidetheveil.com, where you can see articles and photos related to each episode. This is Dave Mace, and when you return for the next episode, I'll be here waiting. Outside the Veil.